Well, I think you're in for a tremendous treat here. I think the conversation today, this fireside chat, is relevant to every single one of you in this room, and it has to do with wellness, and it has to do with really the most largest part of all of our budgets and the most precious asset, and that is human capital. And as you know, the wellness of the workforce, wherever you are, whether you're in a university or whether you're in a hospital or whether you are in a school or a hotel, is something that has a tremendous budgetary impact. And if you look globally, it's estimated about $1.1 trillion worldwide is actually lost in terms of the effectiveness of the workforce if they're not well. And if you actually just look at two diseases or conditions, depression and also fatigue, it's estimated on an annual basis in the United States alone, $200 billion is actually lost because of those two conditions and loss of effectiveness of the workforce because of those two conditions. And so that's part of the equation. The other part of the equation that's really exciting is that there's going to be a tremendous change in the built environment, whether you're looking at college campuses or hospitals or academic buildings. There's a tremendous renovation that's going on in the next decade or so. And we've talked about that earlier in the Council of Competitiveness. And so to my left, you have Paul Shawley here, who is the founder and CEO of Delos, and he's truly a visionary. If you actually look up what impact he's had, he has over 2 billion impressions on social media, and he was featured on the Clinton Global Initiative network, and what he's doing is truly remarkable. So, Paul, tell us a little bit about your journey to this place and what your company does.
Absolutely. Pleasure to be here. As background, I actually spent most of my career on Wall Street, about 18 years, the last decade at Goldman Sachs. Interestingly enough, about 5 years ago, while I was still running interest rate products trading, I saw this word sustainability continue to pop up everywhere in real estate. And everywhere I looked, it was 100% focused on, or almost 100% focused on, environmental thought and environmental impact. And don't know why, but just kind of a question popped in my head personally. Well, why are we stopping there? Why not also focus on human or biological sustainability in the built environment? So the great efforts made by the green building movement and the beginnings of thought with regards to the human condition, but really thought there could be an interesting opportunity. Kind of put my Wall Street hat back on for 1 second at that point and said, wait a minute, you've got $150 trillion of real estate on Earth. And health and wellness is a $2 trillion a year annual spend, growing at 20% a year, the fastest growing industry in the world. What would happen if we put these two things together? Got a couple architects and doctors in a room early on. Didn't tell them why they were there. Basically sat them down and said, okay, guys, what types of things could we do to start to introduce preventative medical intentions into the way we design spaces? This has been, at this point, about a 5-year body of work, assembling thought leadership, mostly private sector IQ across architecture, medicine, science, design, sustainability, what culminated in our introduction of the WELL building standard, which was introduced on our behalf by former President Clinton at CGI 2 years ago. This is a process for buildings to achieve WELL certification as a complement to things like LEED certification, whereby we're really looking at categories like air and light and water and comfort. Again, everything that's relevant to the human condition and figuring out what to do to design spaces, these spaces that we're spending 92% of our time in, indoors, to design them more appropriately for human health, well-being, and productivity. Interestingly enough, with now over 5 million square feet registered to achieve WELL certification in the United States, with over 70 live projects, we're seeing staggering economic proposition here. The cost to achieve a WELL-certified space, for instance, CBRE's global headquarters in downtown Los Angeles, which was the world's first WELL-certified offices, LEED Gold and WELL-certified, over 54 performance specifications across all of these categories that are passively working on the human condition inside, achieved for a 1.5% premium to normal construction. In most cases, these are not more expensive decisions. These are more intelligent and informed decisions across some categories, which I'll get into. But it's really exciting to see a sustainability play that is led with an economic argument. Just to give you an example of some of the premiums we're seeing, the willingness to pay for consumers, at this moment right now we're getting 25% premiums on wellness-infused hotel rooms versus standard rooms in the same property. That's our Stay Well program. 17% premiums on student housing, 30% premiums on wellness home sales versus comparable homes. So you're talking about a very little cost to create and a very big exit value enhancement. So it's an argument that's got obvious social benefits, and from a competitive standpoint, I look forward to discussing primarily commercial office, but something that developers aren't going to look at as a burden or a moral hazard or something that is necessary, but they're not quite sure where they'll recoup their gains. The hotel programming, the hotel property broke even on the capital expenditure required to upgrade a hotel room with about 18 different features, things like dawn simulation, air purification, vitamin C infused in the shower water, which actually strips out, neutralizes chlorine, and some surface coatings. They broke even in 6 weeks on the entire cost. I believe the green building movement at this point is showing 6.5, 7-year break-evens, which is wonderful. But we're very excited to introduce a very relevant economic play here, along with a great social benefit.
So beyond the savings in terms of workforce productivity, in terms of competitiveness on a national level and even in an individual institution, certainly wellness has an impact on creativity and innovation. You talked a little bit about what's known about how important wellness is in terms of their productivity and their creativity.
Absolutely. I mean, when you think of what would a well-certified office mean for the bottom line of a corporation? What is the ROI argument here? There are certain elements that are abstract when you think of enhanced productivity, collaboration, output. And we'll put those on the numerator, if you will. And then there are cost inputs that you can more accurately identify in terms of reducing absenteeism, enhancing presenteeism. And when you think of healthcare costs and the like, we'll put those in the denominator. It's very interesting to think of what a space could mean when you back up and look at the economics of any building. 5% of the cost of any building is its energy usage, its ongoing energy usage. 86% of the cost of any building are the people inside of it. So again, consider what moving the dial in energy consumption could do for that 5% cost input. That's going to matter. But when you can start to address more output, more productivity, less sick days, more activity and acuity levels when you're at the office, and address that 86% cost input, it's pretty staggering. I'd love to give you one example of one of these elements, and that's lighting. Clearly, with the green building movement to date, looking at things like daylighting and how light is important, our efforts with a lot of our medical partnerships with Cleveland Clinic, Mayo Clinic, Columbia Medical School, as examples, we started looking at indoor light and its impact on the human body. You guys may all be familiar with our own circadian rhythm. Okay, so thousands of years ago, before we started building these boxes around ourselves and spending 92% of the time inside, what would happen is the sun would come up, it would be a certain brightness and color and hue, it would cross the sky and set. About 12 years ago, a nerve was discovered in our eye, a circadian optic nerve, would take in light, and that's the only thing that regulates our sleep-wake cycle. What would happen is you would get this very rich blue hue of light in the morning, entering our eye would tell our body to boost cortisol, suppress melatonin. That will give you mental acuity, energy, things for productivity. We're meant to be awake when the sun is up and asleep when the sun is down. As that sun would set, that color would turn to an amber, softer hue, which would trigger cortisol suppression and the beginnings of creating melatonin, which prepares you for sleep. So that's the sun. Indoor light. Since the invention of the light bulb, 100 years ago, what we started to realize is we have all been walking around in a constant state of twilight. We are getting way too little light during the day because we're inside. We're not getting that rich blue hue of light, that whitish blue hue of light in the morning and in the afternoon. Our cortisol is not jumping to the levels it should be. And we're getting way too much light at night. Light is unnatural. Any light at night is bad for you. So you look at an LED spectrum of light, okay, same cost, for all of this. Bluer, brighter hue on one side versus a yellow, softer hue on the other side. It's a subtle difference, but it means a lot for your body. If any one of us are getting exposure to bluer hue light in the evening, it's terrible for us. It's tricking our bodies into thinking it's still late morning. Okay, our cortisol is still way up, and we're not creating melatonin. Conversely, a yellow, softer hue of light, same cost as the other end of the spectrum, just a more intelligent look at what it is, much better for digestion, and much more conducive to healthier sleep preparation. So what we decided to start to figure out was, how can we make indoor lighting circadian smart? What can we do to address and bring natural elements of light inside? Think of a commercial office. Bluer, brighter hue can boost your cortisol, can increase your mental acuity on the spot. Literally minutes of exposure to this can have a drastic impact on the way you're retaining information and what type of output you're giving. When you think of even the winter months, for instance, let's take an office in Seattle. 4 months out of the year, the sun is starting to set early. Your employees are coming back from lunch at, let's say, 1 o'clock. They're somewhat sluggish to begin with. The sun's starting to set. Their melatonin is kicking. Their cortisol is not very high. You're losing a lot of productivity for the last 4 hours of those days. With a circadian proper office, okay, an office that adheres to the principles of the well-building standard in the category of light, we can literally extend the workday in a very natural way, in a healthy way, at zero cost. And that's one example of what to do for productivity.
You've talked a little bit about what you've done in offices, and there's tremendous success in terms of your program in hotels, and I guess the MGM Grand is one example. Maybe you talk a little bit about what you've done with them, and also what do you think is going to be in the future? What are you going to do in schools? What have you done with hospital systems? Give us an idea of what you see in the future of your program.
Absolutely. So the full body of work, the well-building standard, applies to renovation, new construction, for primarily larger commercial office. It's a very good complement to things, again, like LEED certification. In fact, our governing body of this well-building standard, which we call the International Well-Building Institute, has collaborated and has a partnership with GBCI, the Green Building Certification Institute. So that is the same entity of the U.S. Green Building Council that stamps and audits and independently verifies LEED certification. I believe LEED has now been implemented, or there's a registered pipeline of 10 billion square feet in the world in 132 countries in the last 14 years. Interestingly, I believe early on it was positioned as a moral hazard. About a 20% cost premium initially to achieve green building status. Now, thankfully, that's come way down. And candidly, I'm not so sure we're going to hear the words green building in the next decade. I think it's just going to become the right way to build. I believe 32% of everything built right now in the world is either LEED certified or green or equivalent. It's kind of like the color TV. You know, when the color TV came out, it was a color TV for a year. Then it was just a TV. And we certainly think green building is becoming ingrained, and if it's done properly, the cost inputs are minimal and the economics are there. Potentially the next whole push here in sustainability in real estate, we feel, is human or biological sustainability. And clearly a daunting task to even suggest better health through the built environment. And what we decided to do was formulate this as an output and performance-based standard. As a for instance, when CBRE completed their headquarter build, before achieving certification, there is an on-site audit and testing, air quality, water quality, circadian lighting elements, everything that can be measured to make sure that the space has met the minimum preconditions set forth by industry consensus at this point. We've got over 75 industry experts opining on the standard as we speak. It'll become a public document on October 20th for broad use. But it's nice to think of this line of logic for anyone kind of doubting this proposition. Point A to point B would be, do healthier building practices mean healthier spaces? Point B to point C is, do healthier spaces mean healthier people? And C to D, clearly, are healthier people more productive people? Well, the real nice thing is point A to point B is not a question mark. This well-building standard is not a prescriptive input-based checklist that can be gamed. It's certainly not something that you need to adhere to a certain set of standards and then you can achieve a certification. A space will not be known as a well-certified space until the on-site assessment and measured audit of all the spatial components as they pertain to the human condition. Sorry, long-winded answer.
Okay.
To your question, this is great for new construction and renovation. What about the 98% of the square footage that already exists and is occupied and is not going through this whole process? And we felt it was important to have a separate body of work that adheres to the same principles, but is very implementable on existing occupied spaces. And that's the overlay programs that Delos has introduced. Stay Well for hotels. Again, about a 6-week break even on CapEx. We took existing rooms out of circulation at the MGM Grand for 4 days. Inserted about $2,500 of capital expenditure back into each room to convert them to Stay Well rooms. Sold out. $42 lift on a $150 hotel room. So you're talking about a staggering premium from the word go, less than a 2-month break even. We now have almost 2,000 hotel rooms in contract and are looking to penetrate as much as the hospitality industry as possible. Operators love this. It's a lift in ADR, but it's also a brand new category of room.
Give us an idea beyond the light. You talked a lot about the wavelength of light and the blue hue and all that. I was excited. I'm an immunologist here.
Yes.
I'm sure there's some impact on the number of lymphocytes that are in those individuals.
Absolutely.
But, in terms of beyond light, you talked about air. There's a material component, what you're putting into these rooms. What sorts of things are you doing in these rooms?
Yeah, I mean, obviously we've all recognized air purification and water purification, and there's certainly elements that we can contribute to purifying the air, but there's also a lot of attention paid to the materials and the inputs of the mattresses, for instance. We looked at... We looked at as many mattress companies as we could find. As we've started to run this through our network, we had manufacturers calling us. These foam memory mattresses are great for your spine, but 99% of them off gas. So you're getting great rest, but you're breathing in chemicals all night. So certainly looking at one of the mattresses we use, which is Essentia, is made of tree sap. So it's organic. So the material selection has to do with maintaining the air quality, but also the surface coating that we could apply. A lot of great new science. Surface coating that can be applied once a year, reacts to light, photocatalytically kills germs on the surface. Things like dawn simulation. It's a terrible way to wake up to a loud alarm clock. It's not that expensive to give the option of dawn simulation to a guest or even a renter. What's really exciting, though, is also the content. If a guest checks into a Stay Well room, for instance, the first thing they can do is pull up their jet lag therapy app and say, I just landed from Hong Kong at 4:30 p.m. Within minutes, a prescription comes back through the phone from a doctor at the Cleveland Clinic telling the guest to walk into the bathroom, stand in front of that bluer, richer hue light in the bathroom for 2.5 minutes. Hydrate every 15 minutes after that, and your jet lag should be meaningfully reduced or gone. That's your hotel room talking to you. That's different than square footage, and that's what gets exciting when we can turn real estate into more of an experience that's relevant to people.
This is a micro example. I'm actually here with the chairman of the board of the University, Thomas Humes, over there. And in a large research university such as ours, we, on a regular basis, renovate or build new buildings, dormitories, hospital towers, and that's the same situation with all of the university presidents here. And as we approach these building projects or renovation projects, for example, a new renovation of a dormitory, what advice would you give us, a president and a chairman of the board, in terms of balancing the decision about the cost of renovation, which is a little bit higher, and the ROI of wellness of mind? What process would you recommend? Because this is really a sea change. It's an opportunity.
Sure. How
would you advise us?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think when you think of the benefits, it's really twofold. One is just the sheer economics. If folks are willing to pay more for vitamin water versus water, and if millennials have been, for instance, grown up seeing every consumer product out there being infused with some element of wellness or intention, well, why not real estate? Why not the largest asset class there is? So there is an immediate commercial angle, but more importantly and more relevant to this incredible conference is what the impact is. And when you think of the social benefits here of introducing preventative medical intentions in a passive manner, into the very spaces that we're occupying, it's very exciting. A lot of the doctors that we speak with say, look, the biggest challenge is not finding solutions, it's getting people to change their behavior. It's actually getting them to follow the advice. And what we know we have here is you can walk into a well-certified space and you don't have to do a thing, and you're getting healthier. It's a passive delivery of, in CBRE's case, over 54 performance specifications that are constantly and continuously working on the body. So it's great to think of how to influence society without requiring behavioral change. Separately, I think it's, again, on the social play, and we want to bring in education to this. The head of CBRE's global headquarters called us about 2 months after 200 employees moved in. He called me. He said, Paul, the reaction's been outstanding. They've incidentally toured 6,000 people through their offices thus far, and we've got over 40 corporations now signing up to well-certify their headquarters. So that's exciting. But think of reach, even in particularly a university setting. When we can take content or knowledge and we can distribute it in a passive manner, but also inform folks on what's happening, and they can take that home with them. The head of the office said, the one thing I didn't understand was how addictive health and well-being are. I find myself coming to work, riding up in the elevator almost every morning and hearing side conversations from my employees, talking about how they're changing their behavioral patterns at home because of what they're learning about their well-certified office. So I think the social impact is clearly the bigger play. The fact that you can get private developers to say yes on the spot because there's an economic impact is great, because there will be no barrier. But yeah.
So, as you know, I'm at the University of Cincinnati. We're really proud of our design program and our architecture program, and there's a whole generation of new architects and designers coming up through the system.
Yep.
And they also have to be educated
yes.
to think about this important platform and how to consider wellness in everything that they do. How do you actually propose that we introduce this into the curriculum and get them excited about it?
Great question, and something we thought about very early as we started to see this demand. At first, Delos started as a real estate developer. Okay, great, let's capture this arbitrage. Let's build wellness-infused homes. I did this to my house. I've got over 40 amenities built into my home, okay? Posture-supportive flooring, circadian rhythm lighting, the energizing light in the morning, which is, it's like 4 cups of coffee. Light is medicine if you use it appropriately. And our first thought was, well, let's develop wellness real estate. And within weeks, we realized, okay, there's no way we'd be able to meet this demand. Let's go for a volume play. Let's open this up to the industry. Let's price it so cheap that it can be scaled. Let's achieve 9 billion square feet in the next 14 years or in the next 10 years, just like the green building movement has achieved. That's a much bigger impact. Sorry, guys. So we need people to understand how to do this. And if you follow the example of, again, the U.S. Green Building Council, who's been a great partner of ours, Rick Fedrizzi, their chairman and CEO, sits on our board, has been giving us great advice on various elements of how to scale. They've got about 200,000 LEED APs, LEED accredited professionals. The well-accredited professional program will be released first quarter of next year. We're in pilot mode now. There's a handful of well-accredited folks, but it's basically a rigorous course to take and understand all the dynamics of the well building standard. This is meant for architects, designers, contractors, engineers. Our thought here is if we can educate the industry and do it at a price point that's effectively zero, because it's going to allow us to scale, then that's exactly what we'd like to do. So we look forward to getting a bunch of your architects into that program.
Well, we have some great courses that we might be able to integrate that into the training, actually, the next generation of designers and architects.
Super.
I'd like to open it up to the audience. Are there any questions that you might have about Delos?
I have one. We spoke a lot this morning. We spoke a lot this stranded innovation and not being able to make the linkage between ideas and innovation in the marketplace. And you've described now both an idea and an innovation and a scalable linkage to the marketplace that's just going at an exponential rate. Is there any analogy you could give us for other sectors of the economy that we could perhaps apply this to?
Interesting question. I think the first thing I'd like to address is how you enable that. In our minds, you have to collaborate. You have to open this up for as many different inputs as possible to achieve that type of scale. Example I just gave, but if we took it back to a small group of people thinking they've got one of the biggest ideas ever, none of whom were doctors or architects or builders. I think recognizing what you don't know is probably one of the most intuitive things. In terms of how to transform this, I guess, pattern, are you asking, into the business model into other sectors and what sectors they may be? That's really an interesting question. I think perhaps related, but somewhat different, or is the whole technology push. We are getting better and better at this point in terms of measuring the human condition. And I think if we can also take things like Nest and become better and better at measuring the spatial environment, perhaps this isn't a real estate play, and perhaps this formula should be scaled and transferred to technology companies. Something like the Well Standard is a 5-year body of work that really analyzes how any 15 cubic feet around you influence you. How any spatial environment influences any human condition. But we kind of relate this to square footage and certifying buildings. I'd love to see that this business model be scaled, whereby, when we're measuring ourselves with Fitbits and we're measuring the air with when we're measuring the air with things like Nest, well, maybe at some point this will talk to this, and rooms will begin to adjust as needed or as accordingly. It's such a great question. I don't know if I completely answered it, but there is a transfer there. Yeah.
Go ahead.
So how would you rate a room like this? How unhealthy is this room, and what would you do if this was your project?
Yeah, the first thing you need to do is get much more light in here. People are falling asleep right now. They're not. The difference you can make by implementing circadian lighting in here and opening up those shades, or even if you don't open up those shades, just put the circadian lighting in, everyone would feel more awake. Everyone would feel more energized and more engaged. Think of just that one thing and how that could change what amounts to, 75 incredible minds right here. Half of them aren't using that mental capacity because the light is off. You can have the best programming in the world, but the light is wrong, and it costs nothing to change it. So that's the first thing I would do.
Go ahead. Over there.
Your story about the elevator, when you, a CEO perhaps,
Yeah.
hearing his employees talk about their excitement and what they were taking home, and you called that passive behavioral change. You probably are already thinking about how do you bridge the gap and look to the future for active change, gyms and buildings, or
Absolutely.
how does that come together as the next piece?
No, it's a great question. I'm glad you asked it. This whole thing isn't meant to be passive. It's just exciting that a lot of it can be passive. But, once you have that spark and people are interested, okay, maybe everyone or a lot of people learned something here, and they're going to think about their circadian rhythm now, and they're probably going to pay attention next time it's 11 o'clock, and they're staring at some element of blue light, wondering why they can't sleep. That's great. So you've sparked curiosity. Then it's about giving them content and programming and access to be active with that new knowledge and that desire. And, the programming elements, they're everywhere. CBRE can access within a 5-mile radius yoga instructors, folks that can give them nutrition counseling. I think the first thing is just to give people spark to want to strive. And once you've done that, you can get into that more difficult active behavioral change component.
Paula, there's actually a time issue here. I just want to, first of all, thank you for being a visionary and sharing your vision for the next generation of sustainability. And I just want to ask you to close with a comment. Everything you've talked about thus far has been 4 walls and a roof. Mm-hmm. Do you envision a time where it'll be even beyond that there'll be a sustainable village or city or something like that?
It's interesting. There's a project in Los Angeles right now. It's about 2 million square feet in downtown L.A. It's an entire city block, mixed-use, commercial office, retail, and a hotel. That will become the first well-certified block in the world. Clearly now you start to think of community development and a well-building standard for communities. And it just gets so exciting.
Perhaps the University of Cincinnati will become the first wellness university.
Let's do it. Let's do it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.